to the family meeting for Center for Biblical Unity. And as you can tell, Monique's not here. We're not at the office. We're at our home studio. You're stuck with the substitute teacher yet again. But Monique had a conflict come up. So she asked me this morning if I would sit in. So what I did was I took a couple of episodes I had been planning for my short form podcast, kind of put them together and added some content related to the inauguration this week. And we'll go with that. So I'm calling it Wrestling with Christian Nationalism. And as many of you know, I've been working on my dissertation and in a doctoral program the last, I don't know, 2.5 years or so. But in the evenings and on my free time, whatever that means, I've been listening to and watching a lot of content related to questions around Christian nationalism. What do I think about it? Up until a couple years ago, I had never heard of it before. It was something completely new for me. Never came up in seminary. I didn't have a theology of nations. It's been all new for me. And I know that some of you are on your own journey. So if you're watching the live, make sure to jump in the chat and share your thoughts. And as I share some things that I've learned, I'd love to hear from you. But this is really the first time I'm sharing my thoughts and my journey about where I'm at with this topic. Monique and I have done a couple of public conversations before, but I haven't really shared anything like that I actually believe on the topic because I've just been in listening and learning mode. And so this is really the first time after 2.5 years of thinking, processing, reading, listening, trying to understand, having conversations with people that I trust and dialogue partners to go out in the public and say, okay, here's kind of where I'm at right now. So back at the end of the year, I had made a post on the CFBU page, I think it's on December 30th, I thought the great question we will be wrestling with this year is, what is a nation? Back in 2015, the question was, what is marriage? Because of the Supreme Court decision. And then in 2020, the big question was, what is racism? 2022, what is a woman? And this year, I think the big question is going to be, what is a nation? What does it mean to be a nation? Nations and ethnicity. These are big, big topics right now. And so this is going to be kind of an expansion on that. Now, there are a number of ways of thinking about the relationship between religion and the government. And so I just want to start off because I've mentioned this article before on a previous family meeting, but I want to refresh our memory about it just super quick. And if you go to the Christ Overall website, you can find it. Just go to christoverall.com and look for an article called "What is the Spectrum of Major Views on Political Theology, a Proposed Taxonomy of 7 Views on Religion and Government." I have come back to this article time and time again. It's by Andy Naselli and found it so helpful. So we're just going to quickly, I'm going to have Bob scroll down here to look at these diagrams. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. All right, right here. So this is the first one where religion and government are totally separate. And in fact, the government actively suppresses religion. So think of like North Korea. Okay. We're not even going to allow religion to be around or be in the public square. Okay. Keep going. So this is view number 2 is religious separation. Religion must be radically separate from the government. So here we're trying to keep religion away from the government. There's like a wall of separation between religion and the government. And I'm going to pull it up on my computer too so I can see the whole thing. So examples of this, historic examples would be like John Locke, John Stuart Mill, some progressive liberals, John Rawls, who is an advocate for justice, would be in that stream. View number Actually, I'm wrong. That was view number 2. This would be the Anabaptist stream. So this would be like traditional Mennonites and the Amish, and this is where there's just the Mennonites won't um, participate often in voting. This election was kind of a first time for them of really stepping up to vote. Historically speaking, Anabaptists just don't participate in the government. They usually don't participate in the military. They might be conscientious objectors during wartime and that sort of a thing. Okay, view number 2 or view number 3 is religious neutrality, where the government must be religiously neutral. And so this is the idea of promoting no religion. And so this would be the classical liberalism, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, libertarianism, and that sort of thing would be in this stream. Now, let's go on to view 4, because this is where we get more into our topic for today, which is the religious influence view. The government should not be used to promote one particular religion, yet religion may influence the government within limited parameters. And so you might have religious people run for office, but no religion is privileged or institutionalized. And I would say that this was probably my view up until recently. I think I'm rethinking my view. And so, yeah, I wanted to encourage Christians to run for office. And we have and engage in, a form of kind of civil religion. Um, but in this view, we would be pro supporting the building of mosques. We would be pro not a state church, but that we would protect all religions equally. We don't exclusively promote a particular religion. This is kind of the principled pluralism type of view. And I would say that a lot of Baptists, this is kind of their view. Some Congregationalists, Quakers, modern examples, according to this article, are Wayne Grudem, Jonathan Leeman, John Piper, Andrew T. Walker, Scott Aniol, David Van Drunen, and Robert P. George would be in this stream. Now let's go down to view 5, which is the Christian government stream, where where religion and government kind of overlap. And the position here would be that the government and the church are two separate entities, but both are God-ordained institutions, but they have distinct but overlapping areas of jurisdiction, and they can work together under God's authority to accomplish human flourishing. So the church's mission is to focus on making disciples, preaching the gospel. Individual Christians can be influential in the government, run for government office, and the government, and this is the key difference, I think, between position 4 and 5, may actually institutionalize Christianity to some degree, such as putting God in the Constitution or having a religious test to hold office. The government should not identify as Christian in the sense that I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The government should identify as a Christian government in the sense that laws and customs that it promotes ultimately come from the authority of God. And so when we speak out, for example, on transgender issues or homosexuality or abortion or pornography, we're doing so as a Christian and from within a distinctly Christian worldview, and that we think that the government ought to promote and advocate laws and policies consistent with those things. And so historic examples of this would include the magisterial reformers, such as, more high church reformers, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Zwingli Knox, the Reformed scholastics, the Church of England, historically, not today, but historically. The Puritans, when they came to America and established the country, Cotton Mather, John Cotton, Jonathan Edwards, and that this was really the view of the colonies at the time of their founding. Modern examples would be Doug Wilson and the Moscow Crowd, Joe Rigney, and some versions of quote unquote Christian nationalism. And so, anyways, go check out this article, get all the details. I'm just skimming over a few highlights here to help get the conversation started. And so, where in all of this milieu are we? I have been like between views 4 and 5, the religious influence / principled pluralism view, or view 5 of the Christian government and religion overlapping view. Somewhere in that hazy realm is kind of where I'm landing. And I've really been wrestling with this. And then, cut to this week's pageantry on the inauguration. And I was really watching it with all of this in mind. Did you notice, how nearly every speech and every person who's gotten up, at the ball and at the pre-inauguration events and everything, lots of God bless America. If they had Franklin Graham pray, they had 2 Catholic priests pray, they had a black pastor pray. The imam that was scheduled for the inauguration got canceled. And they had a Jewish rabbi pray, sort of a prayer and a sermon combination. But, the Jewish guy was kind of the odd man out. Everybody else were basically under the umbrella of Christendom, Protestant or Catholic. I was waiting for the Orthodox priest. So where was his representation? Or a good Anglican. But, and then there was the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which in my opinion is one of the greatest hymns of Christian nationalism of all time. I would be remiss to not just play a little clip, but I want you to listen to the words. Hopefully Bob can turn on the captions on YouTube. We're just going to play a couple of little highlights, but I want you to listen for the themes of how they are mixing in God and country into the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Okay, you can skip to the next. You can go ahead and skip to the next little section. But do you notice like the blending of glory, glory, hallelujah, very Christian language with God is overcoming his enemies, where the grapes of wrath are restored. This is all imagery from the book of Revelation and bringing God's judgment. All right, let's play the next little clip. So there it is. Just as Jesus died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. His truth is marching on. This is, I think, I love the Battle Hymn of the Republic. When I was listening to it, kind of with a fresh perspective this week, is like, this is a hymn of Christian nationalism. This is a mishmash of using biblical imagery and importing that into our patriotic context. And it really jumped out at me. I love the musicality of it. I always get chills listening to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But it really just kind of made me see it in a new way. And I think that we could say in the inauguration that there was a lot of this that was giving Christianity a strong preference. Okay, I'll grant you there was the one Jewish rabbi with the sermon prayer thing. But overall, like, all of the themes were very, very Christian. Unlike the Republican convention, there wasn't a Hindu up there. There was no Sikh. There was no religious pluralism. That was pretty much, we're in the lane of Christianity. And now our public officials, it seems like there's been some wall that's been broken. And Marco Rubio was just out there in a press conference, I think this morning, and just openly, I'm thankful to my wife and my kids and what a privilege it is, and just talking like a Christian. And I'm so grateful, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. You've got young college students in football talking about their faith on, all the time in public now. It seems like there is something that has broken that says we're pushing back against the negative world narrative. And actually, we do want to privilege Christianity in some way. And um, I think that probably my view 2 years ago when I started this journey was probably view number 4 of principled pluralism. There's a video on my channel where you will hear me say that I'm kind of behind the idea of building mosques and that Christians should support building mosques because of freedom of religion, because I held to a principled pluralism point of view. And I'm really, I think I'm changing my mind about that. That video is still up on my website, but or on my YouTube channel. But the big question that I've been wrestling with, and I want to invite you to join in the comments if you're watching the live, because you're asking some great questions, and we're going to be covering all of these topics. Um, that I've really been wrestling with the reality that not all cultures are equally good, true, and beautiful. There is this ancient idea of the virtue and promoting the good, true, and beautiful. But we have to understand that cultures define that differently. And that has impact in the political sphere because it has impact in what kinds of policies and laws that we create. So I just want to walk you through some of my thinking. You can let me know in the comments what you're thinking, where you're at in your journey. Let me start by just showing this picture that I saw recently on X from a random account, but I thought this summarized the whole issue so well. It's a picture of some Muslim women in the full burqa with the little eye slit. There's 5 of them. One of them has a stroller, and they're at a tabling in a public sidewalk situation. And they have a big sign, a big banner that says Sharia law or man-made law, which is better for humankind? And to me, this is the whole question in a nutshell. Because, again, I'm going to make the statement, not all cultures define the good, true, and the beautiful the same. So scroll down to the caption, Bob, or up, I'm sorry. Radical Islamist women promoting Sharia law in London. Supporting Sharia law in Western countries should lead to an automatic deportation. I thought, well, this is a very provocative question because, how it raises the question of what kind of a country is a country. There are, I think I read yesterday, there's a lot of Muslim countries. I think there's like 50, but that number sounds too big. Let's say it's 20. Okay. There's a lot of Muslim countries. If you go to a Muslim country, you can't just stand on a street corner and start preaching the gospel. Like, that's not how that works. Their whole country is oriented around privileging a particular perspective and a particular definition of the good, true, and beautiful. And they want to bring that to other countries. In fact, part of the Muslim religion is to make every nation an Islamic nation. That's part of their eschatology of what they are trying to do. Someone was asking in the chat, do other countries deal with the current Christian nationalism argument the way that we do? Well, I think they're starting to, because they're seeing, well, wait a minute, this other religion wants to convert the world. I think that being a Christian, we have the best standard, the only correct standard for the good, true, and the beautiful. So wouldn't I want every nation to have human flourishing that is congruent with the historic Christian worldview? And that table, the picture of that table says, Sharia law, it is better than, what does the word say, Bob? Is Sharia law or man-made law? Well, that could just as easily say Christianity or man-made law. Man-made law is just another way of saying secular humanism. And historically, we have been a country, I think, that operates on view number 4 of principled pluralism. I think you talk to the average American, that's kind of their view, putting aside the Anabaptists for a minute. But most Americans believe in some form of principled pluralism, that all religions are welcome to freely practice in our country as long as they are peaceful. But I am starting to doubt that this can actually work in the long term, because there is at least one other religion that wants to make their standard of human flourishing, their standard of the good and true and the beautiful, to become the laws of the land. Okay? And so if we have these competing worldviews, they both can't peacefully coexist. Now, Christians, part of our religion tells us to be hospitable. So we allow people to come in and live next to us and be our neighbors and help them in their time of need. But that's not always a reciprocity that is shared in the long term. I've documented this in other streams of, we just did a special family meeting a couple of weeks ago where Kevin Briggins on his podcast Informed Takes had Laura Powell on, and they talked about the 3 kind of steps of jihad and the 3 phases of Muslims coming into a country and how they operate and what they do and that sort of thing. And it does seem like there is a competition of worldviews. So I'm going to play some clips from a scholar named Joe Boot, that he just says things better than me. And so I'm going to be stopping and starting in a little bit. Bob's got the time cues, and we're just going to work our way through it, because his explanation is just going to be so much more clear than mine. So we're going to play these clips. Now, a little bit, if you've never heard of Joe Boot is a theonomist. He lives in Canada, and he once upon a time was with Ravi Zacharias Ministries, but he has his own ministry now called the Ezra Institute. I like Joe Boot. I like a lot of the things that he says. I just want to tell you up front, he is a theonomist. Just because I'm playing a Joe Boot clip does not mean I'm a theonomist. But I think he raises some solid points here, and he's kind of in that space of, probably I would put him in view number 5, maybe, of where he's at on the relationship between religion and politics in the public square. But we're going to listen to Joe Boot, and then I'm going to stop and start and make some comments. So here we go.
Let's just answer this question here. Many Christians still hold views that Western culture is able and should tolerate significant religious plurality. We live in a multicultural society. So just the other day, I went down to my son's college that he's about to be enrolled in. It's a technical college, and there were more Islamic symbols on that campus than there were Christian. So in that context, Does a theonomic view of civil government allow for religious liberty, or does it require the suppression of false and idolatrous religions?
So this is the setup for the conversation, is they're asking the question of principled pluralism. And it's this idea that no religion is favored in the public square. All religions get equal time, equal representation. So at Christmas, you might have a nativity scene next to a menorah, next to a Baphomet statue, all side by side on the lawn at City Hall. Now, someone in the comments is asking, what's a theonomist? A theonomist is a person who believes that the principles, the eternal moral principles of God's law, ought to apply in all nations. They were not just restricted to Israel as a nation, but that there's general principles that we might extract from the Old Testament as to God's standard of justice and apply those to our cultural context today. Now, there are different strains of theonomy. The one that I've described, I think, is the one that they call general equity theonomy. And it's basically like the most common view of it. Some people would also add on the punishments, the criminality component of the Old Testament law, but not all of them do. But just in general definition of theonomy is that you believe that the principles of the Old Testament still apply to us today. They are not simply relegated to ancient Israel. Okay, so God said, don't steal, don't lie, don't engage in fraud. These are timeless principles that ought to be applied today. That would be a general definition of a theonomist. And that way, I think it's very, very Protestant to be a theonomist. If you get into some of the details about the punishments, which things ought to be criminalized and how all of that works, there are differences in different camps and different streams related to that. Okay, go ahead, and we're going to now listen to Joe Boot's answer to principled pluralism and why he disagrees with it.
Could develop the various aspects of this, but obviously it's one of several questions today, so we'll just address a couple of thoughts and a few things that are relevant. First of all, I think it's important to make the distinction between a multicultural society and a multi-ethnic society. Israel itself, in the Older Covenant, was a multi-ethnic society. When the Hebrews, when the Israelites left Egypt, it says they left a mixed multitude. That meant that there were lots of Egyptians who left with them. And don't forget, when they arrived in Egypt, when Jacob arrived in Egypt, he arrived with all of his bondservants as well. And as they went along in terms of their mission and calling, for example, Jethro is Moses' father-in-law, is incorporated into Israel. Joseph, you'll recall, married Zipporah. And so Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, were half Egyptian. And then, of course, you have Rahab and on and on and on. You see different ethnicities being incorporated into Israel. And of course, that in many respects pictures the life of the church too, because the people of God that are a new race, they're a new people in the new Adam, the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're from every tribe. So the scripture says, from every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom of priests unto God, and they shall reign forever.
Okay, so far what he's saying is that Israel had a multi-ethnic component. So also the church has a bigger, I would say, multi-ethnic component. In Israel, the multi-ethnic component was more of a minority issue. But the church is a global multi-ethnic movement. The kingdom of God is not mono-ethnic. It is different than Hinduism, which is I would argue, a regional religion. It is a distinctly Indian religion. It is for most intents and purposes, it is attached to a particular nation. Hinduism is monoethnic for the most part, but Christianity is different than that. We are a multi-ethnic from day one. On Pentecost, we are a multi-ethnic religion. But a multi-ethnic group can find unity around a common set of ideals, thus forming their own common culture. So just as in the Roman Empire, as they conquered people, there were many, many ethnicities, but they rallied around Roman culture. And so to be a Roman, you could have any color of skin, and you could be from any country and any background, basically. But to be a Roman was to hold to certain ideals and have a shared language and to understand a shared religion. Okay. And so what Joe Boot is saying here is that the church is multi-ethnic. So multi-ethnicity is not an issue because people from multiple ethnicities can come around common ideas and form a common culture. Okay, let's continue.
Now, well, let's look at the United States of America for a moment. America drew people from its early years, its early constitutional period, from around the world, mainly Europe and Britain, but from around the world. And because America had believed something very strongly about God, about the rule of law, about its constitution, it was able to integrate people in a fairly straightforward way into American society. They became Americans. So whatever sort of, whether they were Mediterranean or Nordic or Anglo-Saxon or whatever it may have been or beyond, they integrated as Americans. The sense of American identity was there. In Britain as well, we were able in the past, historically, to allow people into the country. Not too many all at the same time, by the way, because that makes it difficult to integrate people, but to integrate people of various ethnicities into British society.
Okay, so what Joe is saying here is America is, I'm going to use an old-timey word, is a melting pot. You have many ethnicities coming from different countries, nations, leaving the old country behind, as my grandfather called it. My grandfather was an immigrant from Holland. And when I was a child, he would always tell me about the old country. But there was always this idea of I left the old country behind to become an American, and that being an American was before being Dutch. Now, it is a little confusing because when he came here, for the first few decades, he lived in a Dutch community. There was one Dutch church and they all spoke Dutch. But in his mind, as a small child coming to America, that America was his new country. That was his identity. And he taught his children English, and he became a school teacher, and he taught the school children English. And that sometimes over time, the languages of the home country, the old country, are lost to the second and third generation. Some customs are lost. So I, as his grandchild, I don't know that much about Dutch culture. I know some Dutch theologians, but the only Dutch thing that I do is put wooden shoes out for St. Nicholas Day, and I used to put candy in them for my children. And that's pretty much the only Dutch thing that I do. But there was historically been this idea of assimilation. And that's what Joe Boot is talking about, that you come from another country and you assimilate into America or Great Britain or Canada or wherever. And that what Joe Boot is going to argue then is that he doesn't have an issue with being multi-ethnic as a country. His concern is going to be about multiculturalism and what is the shared culture. And so the question here that I've been wrestling with, one of the questions is being an American an ethnicity? Should it be considered a type of ethnicity? I don't know. I'm just asking the question because we have a certain shared heritage and language and culture and customs, even though we have this very diverse background in our personal family histories, that when we come here, we center around particular ideas and holidays and what does it mean to be an American and to assimilate into that. And does that become a type of ethnicity? Because from what I understand from people who travel and people that I've talked to about this, so no matter where you go, you're always an American. Even if, you're a Korean and you go to Korea, people still consider you an American. When an African, when Monique goes to Africa, even though she's African American, they consider her to be an American. They don't use the term African American. Okay. All right, let's continue.
There is a difference, however, Michael, between a multi-ethnic society and the ideology of multiculturalism, a multicultural society. Remember the origin of that word culture, cultus, worship, cult, worship. At the root of the idea of culture is the outward manifestation of the religion of a people. So culture is religion externalized. So when we talk about a multi-ethnic society and a multicultural society, we're not actually talking about exactly the same thing. So when people oppose the multicultural ideology, they're often accused of being racists or whatever. This is nonsense, because opposition to multiculturalism as an ideology is not opposition to a multi-ethnic society. Now,
okay, so I want you to make sure that you're catching his differentiation there between ethnicity and culture. This is a point of confusion that Monique and I have been talking about for quite a while, because often race is pushed in there too. And so race, ethnicity, and culture all get kind of collapsed on top of each other and become one thing. And we make this point in our book, Walking in Unity, the same point that Joe Boot is making is, no, I think there's a difference between ethnicity and culture. And notice his very interesting definition of culture is religion externalized. And he's going to explain more about that in the next clip. Let's watch that.
Now, what does multiculturalism really mean in the context of that question? Well, it essentially means that any society can be governed by more than one ultimate commitment. That a society can be governed by more than one ultimate commitment. And as we're seeing expressed right across the Western world today, and something I wrote about 15 years ago 10 years ago in my book, The Mission of God, is that multiculturalism is, as an ideology, is a failure. It is a myth. You cannot have a society governed by more than one ultimate commitment. Let me give you a very concrete example of how this will work itself out, how it is working itself out. For example, in Britain today, because of immigration from Islamic countries, and as you say, this is connected to our first question about global jihad, huge numbers of migrants from Islamic countries who are not interested in integration into British society as such, but live in essentially Islamic ghettos, have started voting in terms of Islamic blocs, are not interested in living under British law. They want Sharia law. And in fact, today, with permission of the civil government in Britain, there are over 100 Sharia tribunals operating in the United Kingdom. They're supposed to be subject to the ultimacy of British law, but in practice, they don't work that way. And so what we're seeing is the disintegration, the steady disintegration of British society under the threat of mass migration, some of it legal, some of it illegal, when the state has decided that in that context it is going to be a multicultural society, which means we will no longer privilege one religious commitment. Now, in itself, in Britain, that's a contradiction, because we recently had the coronation of King Charles. The British Constitution is a Christian constitution, and the king swore to uphold the law and gospel of Jesus Christ and to govern in terms of his word. Unfortunately, some of those constitutional arrangements, some of the pageantry associated with it has become pantomime, because on the ground, it doesn't really work like that. It used to work like that. It used to be that the gospel was protected and advanced, and God's law was advanced as the law of the land, but that's changed. And so we've got the window dressing of a Christian society, but not its actuality. And that's what I mean by there's a pantomime element.
So this is really critical to what Dr. Boot is saying, is that culture is at its core, his hypothesis is that it's a religious expression of a group of people. And this is expressed through their holidays, what they hold dear, what they consider blasphemy, and it is expressed sometimes even through their clothing, their forms of modesty, how they view family, how they view children, and as being the main structure of society. And so his premise is that his hypothesis, I should say, is that you cannot have a society with competing cultural values. You can have a society of people from diverse backgrounds and countries and ethnicity come around a common set of ideals and assimilate into a culture. But you have to have one culture. You cannot have a society with competing cultural values. Hopefully this is clear. This is a key point of his hypothesis, and he's using Islam as an example and its competition with Christianity as to why it will not work. So if you have a country that is historically Christian, like England or like America, that now we are not only just competing with different internal denominational differences, we are now competing with entirely different worldviews and religions. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next clip.
What secularism basically did was said, well, look, we're going to live under the essential principle that that society is no longer is not a covenant between human beings and God religiously. It's just a social contract, and with that contractarian idea, the society is no longer going to be governed in any sense by a vertical relationship to God, but only horizontal relationships. We'll just agree that we live in this given way, and choice and so-called reason are the only criteria for the life of a society. And a sort of in with secularism crept then, of course, this idea of a multicultural society. It's just people's choice. These are all private beliefs anyway, this idea of the private space over against the public space. This is the secular myth. And so the thought was you can have all of these different religious ideologies percolating away together, and it will be ultimately ruled over by the secular state. Well, that is falling apart. And what we're realizing, and which was obvious to those of us who had thought about it, but what people are slowly beginning to realize is that a society can't actually be unified and stay together and be stable if it's governed by more than one ultimate commitment.
Okay, that is the key to what Dr. Boot is arguing. So Elaine says on YouTube, so there is validity to restricting and metering the flow of immigrants. Is that part of what he's saying? To suit the culture that is in place. That's correct. So what he's arguing is that you have to have people who are willing, if they're going to come from a variety of backgrounds, when they come to your country, your nation, that they are willing to assimilate into your culture and respect and honor your cultural way of being, the holidays, the practices, the values. And that if we were to go to a Muslim country, that would be their expectation. We would have to assimilate into, at least in public, to their value system, their way of dressing, their expressions, their holidays, etc. And so what Dr. Boot is saying here is, this brings us back to the picture that we saw earlier in the stream with the Muslim women standing at the table saying, that Sharia law is better than human law. Well, this is exactly Dr. Boot's point, is that these things cannot coexist. And so the secular project of the last 100 years or so to say, well, religion's just all private, so we can have this kind of principled pluralism, and it doesn't really matter what people privately believe in their homes, because we're in the public space and we just won't privilege any particular point of view. Well, that kind of worked for a while Christianity and our value system was still lurking in the background. But that's quickly breaking down as we are seeing an influx in the West of migrants that do not want to assimilate into the culture of Great Britain or America or Canada, and that the way of life, the cultural values that we practice that are connected to the Christian worldview are being undermined. And this is why I've started to question whether principled pluralism can actually work. I think it works okay when the laws and policies are still kind of loosely based on the Judeo-Christian worldview. But now that we are confronting sexual anarchy in our country, and that we are entangled in big problems like the population is declining and we're killing our children by the millions. Transgender policies, homosexuality, and pornography. This is what I'm going to call sexual anarchy. Now that we are in this and we don't have a standard and we don't know where to swim to, in a way, this is not good, and this will not keep us in the realm of promoting the good, true, and the beautiful, where all religions are seen as having equal influence and equal place in the public square. This isn't going to work. So I don't have this picture, but recently one of the senators was sworn in on the Bhagavad Gita, or the Quran, and as swearing to uphold the Constitution. Well, you can't do that. The idea of the image of God and the dignity, value, and worth of the human person that so many of our laws and policies are grounded on are not compatible with those worldviews. They're borrowing from our worldview as Christians. And so not all worldviews, not all cultures, not all religions promote the same standard of the good, true, and beautiful. They don't all have the same ideas of what constitutes a human person or the dignity of the human person. And so how can we not privilege Christianity and our views? Because if we truly believe that Christianity is the key, is the standard for human flourishing, isn't that the standard we want every nation to have, every person to have? This is my wrestle with this. Okay, let's play the next clip.
Public law. Now, to maintain the unity of a country, that must be one law for everyone. You must have the principle of the rule of law. Now, we get this principle from ancient Israel, because God says there will be one law for the resident and the resident alien, the stranger and the alien. There's going to be one law, God's law. You cannot have multiple law spheres. How do you end up with multiple law spheres, Michael? You have to have multiple gods. So behind every concept of law, there is a principle of sovereignty. In other words, what is the source of law? What's behind the law that gives it its authority? So behind every concept of law, every law order, there is a concept of sovereignty. And behind every concept of sovereignty, there is a God concept. That might be the Islam. It might be Allah, the God of Islam, and the Sharia law. That's the God concept leads to a societal structure under Sharia and a particular idea of law. That might be the sovereignty of the people, as in the direct democracy of revolutionary France and of actually France today. That the people are sovereign. It might be a doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, or it might be a doctrine of the absolute sovereignty of God. So Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God, was the French revolutionary idea. So idea of law, behind it is a concept of sovereignty. Behind the concept of sovereignty is an idea of God. So you cannot have any society that tries to have more than one ultimate commitment is a suicidal society that is collapsing.
So that is a very provocative point to me, is can we survive if there is not one unifying standard to govern a multi-ethnic nation? This to me is the core question. And I want to go to the comments really quick because you guys are having some great discussion in there. Anecdotally, Victoria says, I studied abroad in Japan, and if you want to become a citizen, they want to make sure you are committed to Japanese values and even know the language well. Exactly. I think that this is my point. And, if you go through the citizenship thing all the way, there is some instruction about the American experiment and our history and all of that. But as Americans, we are I think we're rethinking some things. We are trying to figure out who we are as a nation. We are trying, I think, to figure out how to recover from an identity crisis. And I think that I think we're figuring out that principal pluralism isn't going to work. And like I said before, I think hospitality is part of the Christian worldview. And I think that that's why America has been so friendly to immigrants and also in other Western countries, because our religion tells us that. And when a majority of the population are Christians, then there is sort of that ethos in the air that we want to make that into laws and policies. But I think we're starting to realize, oh, wait, with these people comes a worldview. When our nation was predominantly European immigrants, they were coming with a Christian worldview, whether they were coming from Eastern Europe and the Eastern Orthodox worldview, or from Italy or France and coming with a Catholic worldview. We're still in the broad umbrella of Christendom. But now that so many of our immigrants are coming from other religious perspectives, we're trying to figure out, how do we stay unified around a common core of values and cultural identity of what it means to be an American. It must mean something to be an American. And historically, that something has been attached to the Christian worldview. Now, Barbara makes the point that Dr. Boot used the phrase of pantomime, regarding the coronation of the British monarch, sort of window dressing. And I think that she's right about that. That could also be sort of what the National Cathedral is on the American side of things. And we do have these sorts of religious nods, Christian religious nods toward things. But I think what we're wrestling with now is, maybe there's more than a nod here that needs to happen. Maybe there's something actually meaningful about the Christian vision of what constitutes the good and the true and the beautiful, what makes humans actually flourish, and that not all ideas are equally good and valid. And we are wrestling through, what is this? Who are we? and what does it mean to be an American? Um, so yes, Victoria, you're saying right, because we are Americans, we are one nation under God, but I guess some people are uncomfortable with that. And I think that's the national debate. And what I said earlier is it seems like there's some barrier that's been broken recently, that it's okay now to say in public that you're a Christian, and it's okay to pray in public. And I think we're having a national conversation when you hear people like Joe Rogan say, maybe being a cultural Christian, Richard Dawkins say, maybe being a cultural Christian is better than being purely secular or being a Muslim. That this seems to be a better vision of human flourishing. What is the standard that we should use to evaluate cultures? That's the question that I'm wrestling with these days. And how does that apply in the public square? So continue to let me know in the comments what you're thinking. As we close this out, I just want to make, a couple more points. And, another question I've really been thinking through is, can a country truly endure if it practices principled pluralism, or view number 4 that we looked at earlier? And so this brings me to a question that I've also been wrestling is what is the founding fathers' working assumption when they wrote the free exercise of religion clause in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights? Like, what did they mean when they said that Congress or the government shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion? What did that mean exactly? In their minds, were they only talking about denominational differences between Christians? That there was sort of this broad umbrella of Baptists and Catholics and Presbyterians and Congregationalists. And so free exercise, that was the operating assumption that they were making is, we're a Christian nation, we're founded on these Christian principles. And so what we mean by religion is the Christian religion. Or were they looking down the corridors of time and thinking, no, we're going to welcome the Hindu and the Muslim and all these other religions? Is that what they meant? This is a really, I think, important question. And I know that there is some letter from George Washington about including Jews in the free practice of religion. I need to look that up. But like, for example, what about the rise of Baphomet displays during Christmas? Did the founding fathers have that in mind? That the Satanic Temple were they trying to protect that? I mean, you could just play it in the background. There's no sound, but you see these videos every Christmas now where we got the Baphomet displays.
I would like to thank the Satanic.
They're no sound. Yeah. So here they are. This is from December. This is just from a few weeks ago, where they're going to, unveil their Baphomet display next to the probably the menorah and the nativity scene. Baphomet is a statue that the Satanic Temple likes to go around and troll Christians, and then it was destroyed. And this is becoming more common too, that Christians are like, no, this is not part of free expression. This is not religious protected speech. And so I think we're going to have to decide, what religions did the founding fathers have in mind? If you're an originalist, you would say, no, I think there's boundaries to that. Whereas some, like this Christian pastor, this is from a tweet from recently back in December, he says, he's part of the Christian Nationalist stream. He says it should be illegal in America to build mosques, pagan shrines, and temples. Freedom of religion has always meant Christian denominational freedom, not the freedom to establish communities in pagan religions. I think that's a very big question that we are going to be wrestling with, is if we were to go to a Muslim nation, we wouldn't be free to set up, some display. Is this what the founders had in mind? Or did they see us as a distinctly Christian nation? What does religious freedom actually mean? This is an important question. Let's hear one more clip here from Joe Boot where he's talking about this very issue.
That no society ever in the history of humanity has had an absolute religious pluralism. Even in the West today, where we call ourselves multicultural, if you want to sacrifice a wife on the funeral pyre of her husband, in the Hindu practice of sati, or implement the caste system, which is based in the Hindu conception of God, you're not going to be allowed to do it. If you want to worship Baal and sacrifice your infant to a false god and commit it to the flames, you won't be allowed to do it. You'll be able to abort your child, a different kind of Baalism practiced in our culture, but not that one, because it's too obvious. It's not sanitized behind the Western dress of medicine and maternal care and maternal health.
This is the question: is there are limits, even in our own country. Like, let's say there's some renewal of indigenous religions, and so people related to ancient Aztecs want to reinvigorate human sacrifice, or a group of Muslims in Michigan, where there's a high population of Muslims, want to practice honor killings. Are we really doing that? Because it's flying under the banner of religious freedom? I think we have to have more sophisticated conversations about this. I think that we have to think about, does our country's understanding of religious freedom go beyond the Christian conception of a moral standard, or is it just completely culturally relativistic? And this is where the question of one culture or multiple cultures becomes very relevant, is how are we going to arbitrate these kinds of issues? So going back to Pastor Dale Partridge and his post on X for a minute, one of the responses to his post was this. He says, so does your worldview allow for Mormon temples? Which I'm assuming is posted by a Mormon. And he says, no, it would not include that. So no Mormon temples either is seen as some derivative of Christianity, I guess. But this is complicated. And I think that it's a public conversation that we need to have, is how exactly and what are the limits, how are we defining religious freedom and expression, and what are the limits of that? Because other countries, as I've already said a couple of times, they limit religious expression all the time. All right, let's just play this last clip from Joe Boot. I think this is the last one. He's going to talk about it.
There's never been any such thing as absolute religious freedom. That is a myth. It's never been practiced by any society. You always have a dominant worldview that inevitably excludes the worldviews of some citizens. So if you travel to Saudi Arabia or Indonesia or Pakistan, you are not just going to go and be allowed to build a church and start openly preaching the gospel on the street corner. It's not going to happen. The Islamic worldview that dominates that society is simply not going to permit it. If you go to North Korea today or China today, try openly preaching the gospel and proclaiming the lordship and kingship of Christ in the public space. In the Marxist culture, it's not going to happen. You won't be allowed to do it. That's why there is an underground church in those nations, which means the church, which will not recognize the state's authority over it, over Jesus Christ, has to live essentially under the radar.
Okay, so, and again, let's just look at, there will always be limits of religious expression, even in our own country. We're not going to let people resurrect Aztec sacrifice practices. We're not going to, hopefully, let people practice honor killings without prosecution for murder. But what is our standard for that? That is the question we must answer. And to me, the only answer to that question is that the standard is a distinctly Christian religion, and that we are a Christian nation. And because we are a Christian nation, we don't allow these kinds of religious expressions. No matter what, we are going to have to wrestle with the limitations of religious expression. And where we draw that line, that might be, that I think that we need more public conversation about that. But we can't be in this delusion, I don't think, that setting up a Baphomet statue is religious expression, because that puts us on, I think, the pathway to more and more extreme examples that we're going to try to fly under the banner of religious expression, that we don't really, it's out of step with who we have been as a nation. And if we want true human flourishing, what we want to say is the best way for human flourishing to happen is to follow the basic principles of the creation mandate as laid out in the book of Genesis and in the Bible. This is the Creator's design for human flourishing, and competing designs for human flourishing will not work. So if we know that Islam, for example, has an active agenda to make every nation an Islamic nation, I don't see how principled pluralism continues to work in the real world for very much longer. I am becoming a skeptic that that's a workable solution. Should we privilege Christianity in the public square, even if every individual American isn't an individual Christian? And I think that this is a concern that particularly people in the Baptist stream have, is they don't really, they're concerned about cultural Christianity, because they're like, I don't want people to just be a cultural Christian. I want people to be a real Christian. And I'm sympathetic with that. But can cultural Christianity act as a kind of pre-evangelism for people? Well, I think it might be better than the alternatives. I think that a nation that has cultural Christianity, that's sort of the water that we are in, and how we have this general ethos of how we treat one another, and the holidays that we practice, and that we prefer, we like Christian hymns and Christmas songs over whatever it is that Muslims are offering. I think it's better than the secular progressive alternatives. I think it's better than the social justice alternatives. I think it's better than Hinduism. I think it's better than Islam. And I think that these are important and provocative questions for us to wrestle through and have public conversation about. And so this brings us back to our question of what is Christian nationalism? Well, for some, it means that, like in View 4, we saw the influence theory. It means that Christians who want to run for office and create policies that agree with our faith. Some people would say that's Christian nationalism. Okay, it might be. For some, people would say that Christian nationalism involves privileging Christianity in the public square through our customs, our holidays, public prayers, saying God bless America, having prayers at the inauguration, and even having laws and policies based on Christianity. That's Christian nationalism. For some, it means saying that we are going to limit some expressions from some religions. That's Christian nationalism. But if Muslims want every country to be a Muslim nation, shouldn't Christians want every country to be Christian? Because we want true human flourishing for all. These are the questions that I stay awake at night wondering about. How will this be accomplished? I'm not a fan of force and coercion. I don't want that. I really want a genuine move of the Holy Spirit and preaching of the gospel to come to nations. But then once they are populated and their laws start changing because hearts start changing, then we have to figure out, how do we preserve this culture? How do we help people assimilate? These are really, really big questions, and with some levels of complication. If you want more information, I want to refer you to the Christ Overall website. In particular, there's a podcast series where they interviewed some of the big names in the Christian nationalist conversation. I think you'll find helpful. Bob, could you scroll down on that? It's called 12 Reflections on 12 Views of Christian Nationalism. So they got Kevin DeYoung, Mark David Hall, Doug Wilson, Stephen Wolfe, Andrew T. Walker, Tom Askell. There's a lot of important Al Mohler voices, and they're all weighing in, and they're somewhere in that area of views 4 and 5 that we saw at the beginning of the show. I also want to commend to you a couple of books that Andrew T. Walker has written that I have found particularly helpful. The first one is called Liberty for All. It's an in-depth kind of case making for religious liberty and its limitations. And so you can check that book out if you want. A little bit academic. I'm going to tell you, like, it's not a quick read, but I did find it helpful. His other book called Faithful Reason is a book that I'm still working through. It's about 500 pages with the foreword by Carl Trueman, but a helpful book, a natural law perspective on the public square and what it means to talk about the common good. So hopefully those will be of some help to you, and if you want to get resourced or dig into these things more. I hope you found all of this helpful. I'm looking at the comments really quick. Let's see. Okay, I don't see any other questions. All right. Thanks for watching. Sorry I ran a little bit long, but I would look forward to your feedback and welcome that. I'll turn on the comments on YouTube if you want to leave me a comment after the stream is over. And again, this is just sharing a little bit of my journey, some of the big questions I've been wrestling through. And this is hard. I don't claim to have all of these answers yet, but this has been a big topic and a long road for me just to get to this point of, okay, here are some things that I'm finally getting to the really big questions, and these are the things that I need answers to. And the Lord's been with me in that journey, and I'm sure he will continue to help me, and I'll continue to share as I'm able. But yeah, so this is where I'm at so far, and thanks for watching. Have a good week. God bless.
Christ was born.